have said there is no need to. Well, a very good afternoon. It is remarkable that this happened at 6 o'clock this morning, the first explosion, and then a couple more over the next half hour. It produced great drama with extraordinary scenes of fire and smoke, and still all these hours on, as you can see from our live shot from the helicopter, still the smoke comes out at the same rate it was pouring this morning as it spreads out across the east, over the M1, closing that motorway and dominating much of this part of the country. High pressure, which has created sunny weather for much of the south of England, is also responsible for putting a lid on this cloud, for keeping it down low as it spreads out across the region. There has been advice to anybody living in its path to stay indoors and keep windows shut. There'll be more on that shortly. We expect a news conference on the health factors, and we'll go to that as soon as it happens live, of course. But first of all, this report on events so far today from Richter.
It was the biggest explosion in Britain for decades, a dense plume of smoke hundreds of metres tall with almost continuous fireballs rolling into the sky. Millions of gallons of fuel are stored here, and the initial blast was felt up to 100 miles away. BBC correspondent Colin Campbell was reporting in central London when it went off.
I actually can just tell you that I heard a very, very large explosion just behind me a few seconds ago.
Close to the scene, a CCTV camera caught the moment of the blast, lighting up the sky like an early sunrise.
We're right next to it. We're the closest anyone is at the moment.
These local lads went straight to the scene with a camcorder against police advice. Their video footage gives some sense of the scale of the destruction at the depot and the intense heat coming from the fire. Across the field, a building was left shattered by the pressure wave from the blast. This man was in the complex when it went up.
A very, very bright orange light, then an extreme shock, and the whole ceiling fell in, and the doors are blown inwards, and knocked me off my chair.
With so much fuel, it's proved to be almost impossible to control this blaze. Fire crews could do little in the face of this wall of flame. Police are warning that the smoke could pose a danger to health.
Our very strong advice is that people must keep out of the plume of smoke. And if the windows of your house have been blown out or are damaged, then we would suggest that you should evacuate yourself to somewhere safer.
Nearby roads, including part of the M1, were closed as emergency services dealt with the explosion, which shook many nearby residents from their beds.
Literally 6 o'clock on the button this morning, there was this almighty bang, and obviously lying in bed asleep, and just the whole family were woken, and the house literally tremoured.
I got up and I had a look out the window because there was alarms going off all over the place. Actually, I could see these flames just on the horizon over there, and they were monstrous. They were going up 400 or 500 feet in the air.
Buncefield is one of the largest depots in the country, but experts say they are prepared for such a problem and fuel supply lines will not be affected. Given the extent of the blast, it seems remarkable there haven't been more serious injuries. Windows have been shattered for miles around, and some properties have suffered structural damage too. Most of the damage, though, has been caused to the site itself. From the air, you can see building after building smashed by the explosion, with many others still in flames. Police say the explosions could continue for some time. They still believe this was the result of some kind of accident, but it could be days or even weeks before anyone knows for sure. In the meantime, this impenetrable blanket of thick black smoke continues to roll ever further across the southeast. Richard Lister, BBC News.
If you can, if you're not happy, come straight back. About 10 seconds. Well, here back live at the scene in Hemel Hempstead, our own helicopter with the cloud behind it there looking at the scene. And you can see the pictures from the helicopter itself, showing the fire and how the fact that indeed every now and again, periodically, we see the flames rising, still all these hours on from when this actually happened. There's been no let-up whatsoever in this smoke, and it doesn't sound like there will be for some time, because our understanding is that this will effectively be allowed to burn for 2 or 3 days. At precisely what intensity, I'm not sure, but certainly the expectation is that this will go on for some time, because there is a limit to what the fire service can do. Now, the police have just a short time ago given us an update on the information as they see it, in particular on the casualties, on the people who were caught up in this explosion. That's produced very dramatic eyewitness accounts, which we'll be bringing back to you in just a moment. But first of all, this update, which the police gave where we're standing at the moment just a short time ago.
In terms of casualties at the moment, we believe there are about 39 casualties. 2 of whom are seriously injured, the rest of whom aren't seriously injured at all. Obviously the fire is still blazing away, and the fire brigade and the other emergency services, we're working as hard as we can to contain that fire. There is a considerable amount of disruption to the local community, obviously, and I'd ask people to bear with us. I know that we're working very closely with Dacorum Borough Council. We have 2 reception centres for people that live near to Buncefield, one at the Hemel Hempstead Sports Centre, one at Jarman's Park, and I know there are a lot of people there. I know they'll be concerned about their own well-being and the well-being of their homes. We are working as quickly as we can, but I would ask people to bear with us. One other very important message is please don't panic buy petrol. Our recent experience is that panic buying itself leads to a shortage of petrol. Buncefield is just one of a number of terminals nationally, and there is absolutely no need to panic buy. Nationally, we have procedures in place, which means that if one terminal goes down, then other terminals come on stream, and there should not be any problems with petrol at all.
Can we just be clear on the casualties? You say there are 2 people who are seriously injured. Can you tell us more about that?
I can't really. That's my understanding. 39 people were injured altogether, 2 of whom my understanding is are still in hospital, seriously injured. In terms of all of, particularly the police officers that first went to the scene, they've all been and are being assessed at local hospitals as well, just to make sure that they're okay.
And what is your understanding about what actually happened?
Well, again, we're keeping an open mind. It's very, very early days in something like this. We're really concentrating on trying to tackle the blaze at the moment and work with our local community and other partners. We will be, obviously, fully investigating it, but at the moment, we're keeping an open mind, and we need to let the fire brigade do their business before we can actually work at finding out quite what happened.
But to be absolutely clear, you're still live on BBC News 24. You are working on the basis that this was an accident?
Yes, at this stage, although we're keeping an open mind, at this stage we're working on the basis that this was a tragic accident, a very nasty accident, yes.
And we can see behind you the extent to which the smoke is spreading across the region. Just what does that mean for the people living in its path?
Yeah, I think there is another press conference at headquarters which will deal with the larger, more global issues. That's not something I can deal with here. I really just want to talk to the local issues if I possibly can.
But your message to the public would be? My
message to the public would be, don't panic in any way. We are assessing the health consequences. There really are, we don't believe there are any real health consequences. I know that the local public will be disrupted. I know there are a lot of people out of their homes, and they're out of their homes for their own safety. We're doing our very best to tackle this fire, and as soon as we can get more concrete information to people who are displaced at the moment, we will.
And how long do you think this is going to go on for?
Well, I really don't know. I really don't know, but I think we have to be looking at several days.
Well, Chief Superintendent Jeremy Orford there speaking, just holding a news conference, in fact, here just a short time ago. The final question is the one which nobody seems really in a position to answer as to how long this will go on for. Some speculation that it could literally be several days. But certainly at the moment, it is at exactly the same strength as shortly after when this actually happened. Now, we've had very dramatic footage of course, from this, which has come in fact from viewers using mobile phones or video cameras. And Daniel Butcher has been looking at that and reports now.
Some of the first images taken after the initial explosion, flames leaping high into the sky, amateur video and mobile phone pictures sent in by viewers showing just how intense the fire was. Residents woken by the blast speak of the confusion as they try to work out what had happened.
The whole house was shaking. Didn't know whether it was an earthquake or what, and then there was this almighty explosion. All burglar alarms and everything started going off. Looked out the front window and we can see flames.
More pictures from viewers, these showing burning cars. Some of those close enough to capture images like this say they could feel the heat from where they stood. One eyewitness, a tanker driver arriving for work at the depot, described seeing a giant fireball.
It was about 50 metres wide, and then the loudest explosion, the loudest bang I've ever heard in my life. It took me off my feet. I'm not quite sure whether my knees had buckled or whether the blast took me off my feet. I was just in shock at that point. Got up, turned around and just ran as fast as I could straight back to my car.
It's unbelievable.
And first-hand accounts from some of those right by the oil terminal when the main explosion happened. One man told the BBC how he was working with a colleague when the blast knocked him off his feet.
We had to break a window of a chair.
We have here today Mr. Frank Whiteley, Chief Constable, Mr. Roy Wiltshire, Chief Fire Officer. It's
Mr. Edwardson from the Ambulance Service.
Service, and Jane Halpin from the Strategic Health Authority. The Chief Constable will be speaking first.
Just to explain, you're watching BBC News 24. This is the press conference live from Hertfordshire Police at Hemel Hempstead about the explosions today.
I'll read you another prepared script and then I'll pass on to the Fire Service and due course Health. And then, as I say, we'll take questions at the end. Good afternoon and thank you once again for attending the briefing, in which we hope to give you an operational update and some medical guidance around the effects of the smoke plume. Firstly, emergency services personnel continue to work to tackle the blaze and manage the large series of cordons around Hemel Hempstead. The role of police is extended to giving support to traffic management, assisting with refuge centres and supporting our colleagues in the fire service. I've just returned myself from the scene and I'd like to extend my appreciation to all the local residents affected by this for their forbearance, patience and I must say good humour in some quite trying circumstances in what has naturally been a difficult and worrying day for them. On behalf of the emergency services, I would like to reassure residents and local communities that everything will be done to ensure that you get all the advice and support that you need. Given the latest information on the fire is likely to continue for the next 24 hours or so, but clearly that is a moving picture and the Chief Fire Officer will give you a fuller briefing on that. That does mean, however, potentially extended disruption in the Hemel Hempstead area of Hertfordshire. In regard to this, we will try and keep our families and communities informed of the latest update, but at this point it's likely that schools in and around Hemel Hempstead will be closed tomorrow. And we would urge parents to check in regard to local schools, ideally through the Hearts Direct website, which is www.heartsdirect.org. If I can repeat that, www.heartsdirect.org. But also we'll try and pass the information out on local radio, and schools themselves will try and ring parents. It's likely also that libraries and day centres around the area will be affected, at least tomorrow. If I just very briefly recap on the events, the emergency services were contacted just after 6 a.m. this morning following reports of a series of explosions in the Buncefield area. Indeed, there have been further explosions during the course of the day. These were expected, and it is still possible that there will be further explosions on the site. But clearly the fire service will shortly give you a full update from their perspective. There were a number of staff at the depot at the time of the incident, and I'm pleased to say that we can now report they have all been accounted for. However, we will continue to run a casualty bureau, and that number is 0800 096 0095, and if I can repeat that, 0800 096 0095 for those who are concerned about people who were on the site. If ringing from overseas, the number is 0207 158 0125. In terms of an update on casualties, to date we believe 43 people have been seen who have sustained injuries, and I would emphasise that the vast majority of these are not serious injuries. All we believe bar 2 people have now been discharged, but clearly that situation can still change as the day goes on and people report to hospitals. One of the main concerns at the moment remains the very thick plume of smoke which continues to spread across the county. The contents of that smoke are clearly an irritant. It can make people cough, irritate their eyes, make them feel nauseous, and clearly for people who already have asthma and breathing difficulties, they will need to be especially careful. The advice has got to be and has got to remain, please keep out of the plume of smoke, stay indoors, close your windows and tune into local radio and television. If people are feeling unwell as a result of exposure to the smoke, please ring the NHS Direct on 0845 4647. That's NHS Direct on 0845 4647. Clearly, if people are feeling acutely unwell, then contact your out-of-hours doctor, or in a real emergency, the hospital. But we would really stress in the first instance NHS Direct. We clearly expect there to be continued extensive traffic disruption around the scene, and particularly to the M1 motorway for the immediate future. And again, I would appeal, please, for people not to travel to the area, to avoid the M1, and not to contact the emergency services at the current time unless you really have to do so. If I can now hand over to Chief Fire Officer Roy Wiltshire.
Thank you. I'm just going to give you a brief update from the fire service perspective. We have been informed by experts that this is possibly the largest incident of this kind in peacetime Europe, so it just puts some perspective on what we're dealing with. We have continued and completed a search of the blast area to ensure that there was no casualties left in the blast area, and as far as we can tell, we believe those areas are now clear. We have what we call cooling jets, so spraying water on those few tanks that remain, but a lot of those tanks are damaged by the blast and are buckling themselves, and there could well be more smaller explosions to come. Our plan of action is we have a team of our own fire experts, including experts from the oil industry, on working out a plan of attack to actually tackle the fire. What we need to do, as I said earlier, is to have enough resources and enough foam concentrate in place before we mount an attack. And those resources are starting to gather near the scene, and they're coming from as far away as Humberside and Lancashire to make sure we have enough foam to put on the fire and sustain a continuous attack. Once that plan is in place, and we're talking very closely with our colleagues from all the services, from health and from police, we will, once everyone's ready, we will mount that attack on the fire. Thank you.
Okay. James,
Okay.
we'll take the ambulance service.
Yes, good afternoon. From the health and ambulance service perspective, we received calls from this emergency just after 6 o'clock this morning. Because of the information we gleaned at that time, the ambulance service declared a major incident standby status, and that moved the health community into a major incident arrangement. We alerted the surrounding hospitals in Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire of that status, and those hospitals also enacted their plans. Surrounding ambulance services were also contacted, and 4 ambulance services had resources ready should we have needed them. Thankfully, at this present time, no casualties were in a life-threatening condition, and of the casualties taken to hospital, only 1 patient at this time is not of a fairly minor nature. 43 casualties have been dealt with by the health system to date, and most of those are at Hemel Hempstead General Hospital and the Watford General Hospital. The ambulance service has dealt with 9 casualties, and we've had further emergency calls during the day to people in the Hemel Hempstead area who've been affected by this emergency. Our GP colleagues have also dealt with just under 50 patients who've presented themselves or telephoned through the normal channels. We've also assisted our police colleagues who needed some specialist intervention about breathing difficulties from the scene. So far the emergency's been dealt with very well by the health community, and I'm pleased to say that all of the arrangements we have at this time worked extremely well on this occasion. I'm going to hand over to my public health doctor colleague who'll give a general overview of health in the community.
Thank you. Just to restate really what's already been said, the concerns that people may have about the plume of smoke, they should apply common sense. Stay indoors, keep the doors and windows closed. That's the best thing that people can do to not expose themselves to the smoke. The smoke's probably made up of things called hydrocarbons, which I won't go into detail about, but the potential health effects, particularly in the short term, are really only likely to affect people who already have respiratory illnesses, such as asthma, such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. People with these sorts of conditions who are getting symptoms, the symptoms they're likely to be getting are things like coughing, wheezing, further shortness of breath. If people do get exposed and do have these symptoms, as has already been said, if the symptoms are minor and they want advice and reassurance, they should contact NHS direct. They should continue to take their usual medication. If they are not reassured by this or concerned, their GP out-of-hours service should be able to help them. However, if people do experience extreme shortness of breath or are in an emergency situation, clearly that's what their local hospitals are there for, but they're not really there for people who need that advice and reassurance. We have got work in hand to sample the smoke to be clearer about exactly what's in it and what it's made up of. And really we need to know more about this before we can understand what long-term implications there may be, if any, from this exposure. However, what I would restate is that those people who are most at risk are those people who have inhaled the smoke. So clearly, if you are worried and you've inhaled smoke, that's one thing. If it's a question of simply seeing the plume, although it may be quite frightening, it probably simply at a distance poses very little risk. The closer you are to these things, the more worried you are, and distance dilutes greatly the effects of this type of pollution.
Okay, just summarising, this has been, as you'd expect, a trying day, not least for the people living in the vicinity of this. There has been a magnificent response from the emergency services in the county, and I would certainly like to compliment all of the staff in the emergency services who've responded very well. Also from our partner agencies, local authority, and indeed now regional and national government. We've had all the assistance we could want. This incident is under control, but it will nevertheless be ongoing for at least another 24 hours. We're open to questions. Please.
Charles Ray from The Sun. Mr. Wiltshire, you said you'd made a search of the blast area. Are you able to give us, no matter how preliminary it is, where the blast started? Was it in one of the tanks, or do you have a cause, or...?
I'm afraid we haven't that information at the moment, and I think my colleagues from the police are really dealing with the witnesses and calls.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where it took place and so forth, it's far too early to be sure, but we are currently debriefing witnesses from the scene. This is obviously the people who were working there. All we can say at the moment is there is nothing that indicates anything other than an accident on the site.
Can I just follow up on that, please? Rod Chater, Daily Mirror.
Yeah.
It's been an agency report in which a bricklayer who travels that road, has done for 20 years, in the last week has seen foam seeping out of the area and across the road, and assumed that there had been some kind of leak, either of fluid or of gas. So are you aware of that?
I can't confirm that either way at this moment, but if you've got details, we'd like to contact that individual.
Okay.
Further questions? Yes.
I want to just ask the fire service, how on earth do you go about investigating a fire of this magnitude?
It's a good question. The damage that a fire that intensity will cause may or may not leave clues behind for the fire investigation team. So I think we will be reliant, along with the police, on the witness statements and talking to the witnesses, certainly in conjunction with the police force. So that's probably going to be our best clue of how it happened and why it happened.
Because presumably you were just effectively left with a crater.
Well, we're not sure. Obviously, you've seen the fire yourselves. You've seen the picture. Until we've put it out or it's burnt itself out, we won't be able to get in there until it's cooled down to actually find out what's left.
Can you say in which? Sorry. Can you say in which part of the Buncefield depot the fire started? Was it in the aviation fuel end or was it in the normal petrol end?
Again, I think that will come out in the investigation.
Chief Constable, can you give us any idea of how many domestic properties have been affected and how many people have been displaced?
I can't be precise at the moment. There has certainly been a number. Most of the blast, though, was felt on the industrial estate immediately behind the terminal, and that's where most of the damage to buildings has been done. But certainly within a reasonable radius of there has been damage to windows and things of that sort. We're not talking hundreds of people, but certainly dozens of people have been affected in that way and displaced from their houses.
Into the refuge centres?
Yes.
You said this was one of the biggest accidents in peacetime Britain. Can you give us a clue or an idea of how much extra foam you need? I mean, how much have you asked for from as far as, I think you said Humberside in Lancashire?
Well, at present we have a 250,000 litres of foam concentrate, which you mix with water to make the foam on the way to us. We're working with the oil industry experts to see if even that's enough. And I know we have had international offers of help if we need it.
How much if you mix that concentrate with water would you get? I mean, would it be 4 times or?
Much more than that. We're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of litres of foam.
So that's 250,000 litres of concentrate?
Yes.
Does that mean millions of litres of foam?
Yes.
250,000 millions of litres?
Yes. So.
Do you hold